My brother passed on the 22nd. He went into the hospital the Wednesday before that. He was in the hospital Wednesday to Wednesday before we really knew he had very little time left. He had lung cancer and nobody knew until he
Oh, wow. Oh,
Oh my
so I
gosh.
saw him on Wednesday, and then Thursday I went in and stayed until he passed Friday morning.
wow.
Man,
How long has this been going on, Terry?
Well, we didn't really know he
No
was
one really knew. Mm.
really lung cancer. The physicians told me that, your body's so miraculous.
Yes, true. Mm.
These horrendous things until you're 95% gone and then suddenly you collapse. So
Yeah.
he must have had it for years.
oh,
Wow. Yeah.
So I guess we have 35 people in, so I think that's nice. Most of the names I recognize. So what I wanted to do first, I thought the nicest way to start this off was that a while back I had wanted to do a podcast on flash fiction, and Tony was the first person I called and said, "Hey Tony, will you be on a podcast?" And he said, "Of course." So I recorded it. This is a story you've probably all heard before because he's also done it for the Noir de Bar. So if you were there, you've probably heard it before, but this is a different recording of it. So what I'd like to do to start this is to play a story that he wrote and read. So if I can get this to share the right screen.
Thanks, Gary. That's a
that's a
lovely,
great idea.
Yeah, it's a
lovely
wonderful
idea.
idea.
Okay, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to turn the microphone around, and we've pre-tested this. We're hoping this is going to work out well. This is Tony reading 3 or 4 years ago, one of his stories.
Mhm.
The snow reflects the moonlight and the sound of my boots. I mutter to myself, Zhivago, tromping from Yuriatin back to Moscow in the unforgiving Russian winter. She has a chain link fence around her place. It's a little more than waist high, meant to keep her dogs in, not people out. In my condition, it only takes me about 15 minutes to traverse it. After several attempts, I managed to fall on the inside of the fence. Now, how to awaken her, but not her roommate? I am incapable of action unless I've first read about it. Words are my guide. In stories with similar situations, the protagonist usually hurls something at a bedroom window to wake up the occupant. For instance, in Brady Udall's story, Night Raid, the protagonist tears a tar shingle off of a doghouse and throws it like a frisbee at a window. There was also a goat involved in that story, but I'm pretty sure he didn't throw the goat. There's no hard object handy because there's over a foot of snow on the ground. It takes me a few minutes to realize I can use the snow. I gather up a snowball and pitch it at her bedroom window. I have to hit her window 3 times before a light comes on. I'm not going to tell you how many snowballs it took for me to hit that target right. Vienna, I shout, forgetting my intention to be quiet. I go for Marlon Brando as Stanley Kowalski. Instead, I sound like Woody Allen whining. Vienna, ha, 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 ha. She opens her window, pokes her head out. She's a vision of loveliness in her lingerie. Well, if you can call a high-collared flannel nightgown lingerie. The final snowball hit just as she opened her window. She pulls handfuls of snow out. Tony? Deanna, I need you. I never should have broken up with you. I broke up with you, Tony. I don't need anything except your typewriter. That's what you said, Mr. Profound Observer of the Human Condition. Now go home and write about rejection. I can't. I'm too drunk. You're not drunk. Yes, I am. She started vomiting after 3 beers, which is why I had 2 beers and a Benadryl and a double espresso at Starbucks. Great. Caffeine, alcohol, and an antihistamine. Stimulants and depressants. In a normal person, they'd cancel each other out. I'm not normal. I love you. Shut up over there. The houses were close together. Apparently, I'd awakened a neighbor. I shouted back at him, "Dangerous Bolsheviks out here. We're going to overthrow the Tsar. I can call out the militia." Thanks, Tony. Like I need more trouble with my neighbors. This wasn't going according to plan. In my mind, I searched through dozens of stories about drinking. Maybe Robert Stone's Fun with Problems would work. The protagonist gets an alcoholic to fall off the wagon so he can sleep with her. Have a drink with me. You know I gave up drinking for Lent. There's no alcohol in the house. We'll go out. It's 3 a.m., Tony. The bars are closed. That after hours club, the private club, they won't let you back in. You're banned. It's just a misunderstanding. When you found out the club didn't have any black members, you stood on the bar and gave your Atticus Finch speech. Did it work? No, the club is still segregated, but they got the local school board to remove To Kill a Mockingbird from the required reading list. This isn't going well. I try to think of something, anything. I remember a line Laurie Moore wrote. People will do anything, anything for a really nice laugh. I have a great laugh. I give her one of my best, a full basso profundo. Santa Claus has nothing on me. My laugh has the usual effect. It awakens every dog in the neighborhood. Anna's dogs, slugabeds though they are, can't ignore this. Better start running, Deanna says as she closes the window. It's fortunate that I'm wearing a winter coat with thick insulation. I lose some of the left sleeve to a ferocious beagle before I tumble back over the fence. On the way over, my face scrapes against something. Then I'm lying face down in the snow, bleeding from a small scrape. I search for literary precedent. Again, I think of Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago. The young revolutionary Pavel Antipov is left bleeding by the slash of a Cossack's saber. Or was that only in the movie version? Well, those beagles definitely had a Cossacky look to them. I rise unsteadily. I'm filled with the desire to write. My prose can make this a noble defeat. Better yet, I'll rewrite this as a victory, which it will be, if only I can remember where I live.
Oh.
So Tony told us that he tried and tried. Sorry, Tony told us he tried and tried to get that story published, and only after he changed the title, right, was he able to do that. But he only changed the title, and then all of a sudden it got picked up by a couple.
What was the first title, Gary?
I don't remember. I'm sorry. I don't.
And what was
remember.
the final title?
Yeah, well, hold on.
The 3 a.m. literature.
The
Oh,
3
yeah.
a.m. literature.
3 a.m.
The
literature.
3 a.m. literature, yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
that's right. You changed the title. Mhm.
what I wanted to do was just talk a little bit first about Tony, give I don't know, give an overview of the way I saw him, and then open it up for everyone else. You know, anyone who has been in a room with Tony even once would agree that he made a big impression.
Yeah.
First of all, physically, he was a big guy, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't
Mhm.
miss him in a room. But then there's his voice. It's strong, it's distinctive. Think James Earl Jones or Orson Welles distinctive. It's solid, it's booming. He's incredibly carefully spoken and articulate. And then there's his other voice, and that's his writing voice. And that was very distinctive as well. Tony had, anyone who's talked to him would realize Tony had an encyclopedic knowledge of everything. He must have retained every fact that he ever heard or ever read, because he had a way of infusing that knowledge into the conversation and stories without making it seem like a data dump. It was just artful. And Tony took the craft of writing really, really seriously. He tried to learn something about writing from every book he read. I remember him walking in, I don't use this for illustration, but I remember him walking in with text, with books that he had read, and there were tabs, colored tabs, all over 3 sides that were open. I don't know what the hell they meant. He knew what they meant. And he was able to turn to any page he wanted to pull out the quote he wanted like that. He knew what they were for. When writers made presentations, everyone in the audience would listen to the presenter. Tony always had a pad for writing down notes, and he was always asking questions. Sometimes he'd ask the things that he wanted to know, but a lot of times he was asking it so that others in the audience could get the answer he thought they needed to hear from the author or the presenter. Also, if you had any exposure to Tony, you know that he helped other writers in more ways than we can even count. I've often said that he's given back more to writers than any other writer I know personally. He served 2 multi-year terms as president for the Brandywine Valley Writers Group, as well as other positions there. He helped me found the Mainline Writers Group and the Wilmington Chadds Ford Writers Group when I was too scared to think that I could do it alone. And he did it both in operations and in leading it for the past 10 years. After the meetings ended, he would tell me the things I should focus on or do next to help the group. I didn't always want to hear his suggestions, by the way. But Tony was always right. All of his suggestions were always right on the next thing to do. And Noir at the Bar totally owns its origins to Tony. Tony told me that Tony told me about the people who ran the sporadic Noir at the Bar in Philadelphia wouldn't select him to read there because his fiction at the time hadn't been published. They'd all been published. They all had novels published. He hadn't, and they wouldn't let him speak. This is a guy who co-wrote a book that sold over 350,000 copies in multiple editions, more than anyone in that other noir group would probably ever sell in their lifetime. They wouldn't let him. So I told Tony, fuck him. We'll do our own noir events. That's exactly the conversation that happened in the parking lot. And we did. Tony read his fiction masterfully at every single one of the 7 events that we held. In the writers group, Tony, yeah, I'm still here. In the writers group, Tony attended over 60 critique sessions. His pieces were hard to critique, honestly, because they were nearly perfect in structure and pacing and in characterization. It's ridiculous when you're arguing over one word because that's all you've got to correct, to fix in Tony's piece, right? But that's what would happen. But during those critique sessions, he gave back the insightful feedback that other participants needed. He also knew when to pull back on the critique. And I remember one session watching a writer having their weaknesses exposed by every person in the critique lineup, right? Every person in that group. And when Tony's turn finally came up, I watched him closely. I was wondering whether he'd drive that final stake into the person's ego. He didn't. Instead, he offered a few spelling observations and left it at that. Tony had a big heart, and he knew when to speak up, and he knew when that person had had enough. And I want to tell you that Tony, personally, was a really, really good friend. If I had a question about a short story I was submitting somewhere, he was on my short list of people I knew that I could send it to and quickly get valuable feedback that would make it actually better. A good job remark from Tony was a banner to be bragged about and waved overhead for everyone to see. Tony also, I'm not sure if all of you know this, but Tony helped other people publish their books. He volunteered to edit Gary Bueller's book, which we finished and published just months before Gary passed away. He edited my first book. I looked forward to sharing our ride to the various writers groups meetings and the conversations on every topic that you can imagine. It deepened our friendship and it covered everything. If I do have one disappointment in Tony, and I tell you I do, it's the fact that he never got around to publishing a book of his own short stories. I hacked at him and hacked at him, but I couldn't get him to move on that. That's my one disappointment in Tony, that other people can't read how masterful those stories are in a collection. In the end, I hope that my words give you one perspective on Tony. He had a presence in so many ways. He shared his talent with huge numbers of people. And I want to say that the writers groups in this area exist because of him and will bear his influence for years and years to come because he's just embedded in it. Our writing community is lucky to have Count Tony as one of us. So I was hoping now that some of you would want to share your stories of Tony, either your experiences or your thoughts of who he was or whatever you want to do. Terry, would you want to start?
Well, before we do that, I just want to, I don't know if it's appropriate at a memoriam to applaud, but I applaud your piece, Gary. And
That's very sweet.
It's a wonderful expression of Tony, and we all of us who knew him know, that every word is really well said and said with love. And I appreciate hearing it come from you, and really appreciate you playing that clip of his too.
Thanks. He was a really, really good man.
Oh, they played the clip. I think I missed it.
Well, we'll play it again at the end if you want, or I'll play a different one.
Sorry. Okay. All right.
So Terry, do you want to?
That was brilliant. Thank you so much, Gary. It's kind of hard to talk, but I wanted to add that he was such a hard worker. He was a night owl. Okay, did not like getting up in the morning ever since we were kids, but kind of like my mother and my brother were similar in that they could stay up till 1 or 2 in the morning and be cogent and productive and all that good stuff. And my father and I are up at 5 a.m. when he just went to bed 2 hours ago. So, but he was productive and driven to generate the content that I think, will stand on its own for a very long time. And that's why I think so many people loved him, because it didn't matter what the genre was. Right. He knew mystery, he knew sci-fi, he knew comedy, and he knew business practices and business international cultural data. And so it just didn't matter if you wanted the name of an obscure English author from the 16th century, he would know that. And that's kind of hard to fit into a category too. A lot of people do research and they get in a niche, and he didn't have a niche. So I just appreciate that he could touch all of you with his broad knowledge base, I guess.
A day job?
Hey guys,
Did he have a day job? Not,
Can you shut the door, please?
he liked writing, so he had tons of writing gigs over the years that, were across different environments. The last day job he had, I think, was it at Pepper's Music, the publishers of music in Paoli. Yeah, he sold, and he was in sales.
Hmm.
He did sales over the phone because of his voice. He was
Mhm.
and he understood motivational aspects of different people. Why would you buy this Bach? Whatever. And he could figure that out, and he penetrated a lot of markets that way. Yeah.
Terry, he told me at one time, this is Ella, that he used to manage a comedy club.
Oh yeah. He worked for Andy Scarpati. Had multiple clubs in all, I guess, from Jersey to he was but
There was one in King of Prussia.
yeah, he had King of Prussia, he had Phil,
Oh, okay.
he had and so what he would do, he would actually find the club venues for Andy, and then he booked comics. I mean, there's tons of comedians that he knew from back in Texas to New York to, he lived in Texas for 3-4 years in Houston.
Mhm.
And he enjoyed it down there. He was, I think that's when he started working with comedians.
Mhm.
Yeah, but you could hit up dozens of them in this area, and they'd all know him. And he helped a lot of comedians, just like he helps you all with all of us with writing. He'd help them with their sets. He'd critique their sets. He'd help them understand what's a good joke, what's bad timing. He did a lot of improv. He went to New York. Melanie's on here, I think, and Melanie knew him from those days, right? Melanie, you're on mute.
Okay.
I think he said he wrote jokes for Johnny Carson. Is that right?
Jay Leno.
Jay Leno.
Yeah,
That's
Jay
true.
Leno used one of his jokes or two of his jokes on his show. Yeah.
I spoke with him about it because I had a good friend who wrote jokes for Jay Leno, and actually ended up doing it full time out in California after freelancing while he lost his job at an advertising agency where he wasn't doing the work because he was writing jokes for Jay Leno.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I break in here? I'm Rick Hedgie. I work for Andy Scarpati, and I met Tony through the comedy business. And yes, Tony and I used to write jokes and send them in daily to Jay Leno. And Tony had an improv group that started working for Andy down in a club in Wilmington. And eventually he started managing clubs for Andy. And he was a help to so many comics. He would evaluate their sets. He would tell them this joke needs punching up here. It was, he was a great guy. I'm so happy that he was my friend, considered, one of my best friends. And like Terry was saying, he started out down in Texas, and he had a few brushes with Sam Kinison down there when Sam Kinison was just starting, and he actually he managed a comic down there that made it to, Bill Hicks, who was one of the biggest stand-ups. Tony actually managed him when he was down there in Texas. And Tony actually started the Philadelphia Comedy Writers Guild also, where he would help comics. He was just a giving guy. He just helped anybody that needed help me out quite a bit. And we had a TV show that ran for 3 or 4 years, and Tony was a player on there. He wrote a lot of bits and sketches, and I'm going to miss him. And he was just a great guy. He was a great guy. And let me say thank you for letting me break in here.
Oh, thank you.
What, Terry or anybody else that can answer this, I'm just curious, what was the impetus for him to move down to Houston? Why did he go down there?
So I moved there.
'Cause you moved there.
Follow the lady.
So it's your fault.
Yeah, it's all my fault. He lived with us for a while, and he doesn't look like maybe he does to you, look like a big family guy, but he never got married, he never had kids, but he would have been a great, he loved my daughters very much.
Mm.
And they kept every card he ever sent them, because did you ever get a card from my brother? They're awesome cards. Like the kind that would open up and then a tree springs out of it or something. Yeah. So he moved down. I moved in 80, 83. He moved down, maybe 81, stayed till 84, 85. And like Rick says, he managed a bar down there for a while as a sideline to other stuff he did, but he understood everything, how to run that business, from the making of the drinks to the booking of the acts to everything. So then, and we both came from our parents are musicians. Mom and dad both taught voice. Mom and dad both taught at Westchester University, but then they made a rule that husband and wife couldn't teach in the same department. Dad became the choir director at Haverford High School. And he was there for a long time. So we saw mom and dad perform. We were little, and it was kind of embarrassing when you're tiny and you're in church and your parents are singing and the whole freaking church turns around and looks. So mom was a soprano, dad was a tenor. And so I don't think my brother or I had any fear of standing up in front of a crowd, because that's what everybody did, isn't it? So he was always drawn to the arts, always drawn to theater and improv and writing and music and all of it.
So talented.
Very.
So talented.
Something we haven't talked about that Tony was really good at was actually the business of writing. I mean, I know I lived in fear of his asking me, well, what have you got out? And I know for me, just knowing that he was asking those questions, always attuned to, my level of expertise and daring, but he was always pushing me not just to write, not just the skill of writing, but to submit, to do the business of writing. And that was another one of his great skills. And I think it's another way that he helped a lot of us. And I'm just very grateful to him.
Yeah.
He brought that up to me often after the meetings. Why aren't people submitting? They're not going to get read if they don't submit.
Yeah.
And that influenced some of the programs that we pushed. Was specifically because I was listening to Tony and said, okay, then what you're telling me is we need to teach people that, or we need to teach them presentation skills. And that's the reason, part of the reason why we started doing stand-up readings.
Speaking of that, Gary, I remember the last time, at least that I participated in a mainline writers group opportunity to speak you suddenly were having, it was great, regular opportunities for writers to read their material. And I remember everyone giving the critiques, and then Tony offering up sort of the last one. And it was always a zinger. It was like, he's sort of like the nice Simon Cowell of American Idol. Like he went directly to the truth. He told you exactly what you didn't do right. He said it nicely, but he did not mince any words. And you had to be grateful for his insight and his willingness to share and just the generosity behind that idea. So I remember doing a reading and think I did a really great job. And Tony went right to the thing that I sort of subconsciously knew I hadn't done well and pointed it out. I'm like, yeah, of course. But he was very kind about that, very knowledgeable. He's somebody who was there really from, I think I met him around 2003 or 4, whenever the Brandywine Valley Writers Group started. He was there shortly after. And I've known him all those years. And one of the last things he said to me was something like, what's taking you so long? Why haven't you got your thing out yet? You know?
Yeah.
So and the last thing I want to say about him is also always with the voices when he read his work. No, skimping on offering up really cool voices, lots of different voices. So I love Tony, and it's really hard to imagine he's gone so suddenly. So.
Can I say something that dovetails off what Jane just said? I went to whatever the name of it was at the time, Wilmington Writers Group, when it was at Round Robin. And I had no idea what this critique group was about, except I brought my however many pages all typed out like it was supposed to be. And then it went, and now you will read from your, and I'm like, what? I'm not reading. I mean, I just remember sweat on my hands and my face. And Tony was in my group and he offered to read it. And I'm like, yes, how great. Not only will this man read it, but he sounds like he just came from a Shakespeare in the Park group or something. Like he's obviously straight from the theater. This is so great. So he read it.
Voice, yeah.
And then, when you hear your stuff read, you're like, uh-oh. This is, I mean, it's yay for him because there was accents and stuff like that. But different people are coming up with stuff. And I just thought of Tony recently because I'm in another writers group and there's two people, it's a lot of beginners, I'll say that. And I thought to myself, what would Tony do? Because I cannot, Tony was so kind in his critique, so kind. He came up with just an excellent way. He didn't shirk his duty, but he said it in such a nice way. He said, instead of doing what my first knee-jerk reaction, which is, start for sentence number 1, this, pick. He just said, make shorter sentences. Now, mind you, that book was 330,000 words. Eventually, when I was finally done with it, it was slightly under 100,000.
Wow.
When he said, make shorter sentences, he was compiling a lot of critique in one sentence. And I thought, God bless him, because if he had picked out every single thing I was doing, I would have just gone, oh, how embarrassing. I'm never going back. And he did it in a way where he gave me something to do, but it also encompassed all the millions and millions of things I was doing wrong. And I just try to emulate him every time I see something. And then I will also say, Tony is one of few people in the group who actually went on and did reviews for me on Amazon. And the other thing is that when we would split into groups and Tony was in a different group, he did not want to be reading yours when it was Tony's turn, because it would just be like your voice tapers off into nothing. Everyone's heads turn. His voice just commanded the room, and you might as well just all put your thing down while he's reading. I just, dearly, dearly miss him. I know I was just, another person in a group, but for him to be such a influence, just a wonderful, wonderful. I think about him all the time.
Yeah. Gary, can I say a few words? So my relationship with Tony started with fear. I was terrified of him when I first saw him. And it was compounded by the fact that I think it was a reading, and I had the misfortune of following Tony in my reading, which was an incredibly difficult act to follow on any occasion. But I also made the mistake of picking a story that just didn't quite fit with the mood of the room. And I was just really disappointed in myself and thinking, oh my goodness, I'll never amount to anything. I had one of those, downward spirals as writers sometimes have. And I was sitting at a table next to Tony, and he gave me a tip or two, which of course were exactly right, but that put me even more into the downward spiral. And so I went home and I made a decision that I was never going to write again, ever. But the following morning, I made a different decision. And actually, I think I talked to you, Gary, briefly. And I decided that I was going to reach out to Tony and see if he would be willing to share his experience and any tips for reading to the group, because he was so good at it. And he said, sure. And we met in a cafe somewhere in Westchester. I can't remember which one. And he brought a file folder full of articles and tips, and he printed a guide for me to follow, and he explained everything. And then we just talked, and we spent, I would say, a good 2 hours or so just chatting. And I kind of got to understand what he was about, and my fear dissipated, and we have become really good friends. And he would check in with me because my mom was not doing very well at the time, and I know he lived with your dad, Terry, and his dad, of course. And we would just always check in with each other. And then when finally, my first story was published, Gary was the first person who shared it on his Facebook page and on his Twitter page with a recommendation. And that was very moving for me. And to have this come from Tony was something I'll never forget. I'll miss him dearly. In fact, when I signed on today, I was kind of looking at the faces thinking, wonder if Tony's going to be here.
Mhm.
It's one of those people. I'll miss him very much.
Thank you.
He is here.
Yeah, sure.
Can I throw something in, Gary? Or all of you? Greg Frost. Mary Jones is also on here someplace in one of these boxes.
And we all know the both of you.
And you all know the both of us. We run the Writers Coffee House in Wayne, and Tony was a fixture of the Writers Coffee House that we ran, and he was also invariably the last person to show up for every coffee house. So, and Mary, I think will attest to this. I'm not making this up. We would think, he's not coming this time, and you kind of. So the first 10 minutes, you're kind of, everybody's introducing themselves and talking about what they've got going on. And you're thinking, is he going to show up? Is he going to, and invariably he showed up. And it wasn't sort of until Tony was in the room that it was okay. Now we're really actually having a coffee house. Okay, we can, go ahead with it. But the thing is, relative to a lot of what a number of you have said is the fact that in giving people advice, in giving people feedback, the thing about Tony was he was a gentleman. He was an
Absolutely.
extraordinary gentleman. You know, the stuff was dead on. It was always wonderful advice, but it was always given to people in such a way that it was just, I don't know, it was decent. It was so generous. And that's something you can't invent. And I am still shocked at the idea that we're going to have another coffee house eventually when COVID allows us to in real life. And we're still going to be looking for him to walk in because it's just the way it works at the coffee house.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks.
And to add to Greg's comment, he always had something to share that no one else could. Whether it was notice of a reading going on somewhere, or the Brandywine coffee, or the, a meeting of another writers group, he always, whatever he had to share that might be helpful to other writers, he gave. And I also loved his sense of humor, the twists in his stories that were just kind of devilish. They were unexpected and unique to Tony. You could just see him kind of giggling to himself. Yeah.
If I could just add on, Tony was the first person I met when I came to the mainline writers group. And I will never forget meeting him because he was such a huge presence and he was just so kind and so welcoming, because I'm sort of shy, and he just made me feel like this was a friendly, homey place. And later on, I was in a critique group with him that Paul Popeil had started. And I remember Tony in his little folders, and he would always hand the pages back and they'd be in a special little folder, and he'd have such wonderful comments, always helpful. And once I was published and I had to start speaking, he was the first person who came up to me and said, okay, now when you have to get up on stage, this is how you do it. And he walked me through it and was like, you don't have to be afraid. This is what you do. It'll make it easier. And he would be, whenever I do a reading and he was there, he would make a point of saying, you did a really good job. And it just meant so much to me because he was so very kind.
No, you don't hear. Do I give this to you?
So years ago, this is in about 2010 now, maybe 2009, I'd been working as a freelancer for years out of my house, and I decided I'd got to get out of my house, and discovered that there was this writers group, the Brandywine Valley Writers Group, meeting here in Westchester, and this guy named Tony Conaway was in charge of it. But I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know if it was like a closed group, how you get in, what do you do? So the first thing I did is I wrote an email to him, and I'll never forget, I wrote, "Dear Mr. Conaway." and I have to laugh in retrospect because it was such a formal letter to him, and I didn't know him clearly at the time. And once I got to know him, he was such a gracious man and so giving of himself. He's like, yes, come join us. And, he was president at the time. I sort of offered to be his assistant in any way I could, and that ultimately ended up my becoming president, which was not my plan, but there it was. But he was a great role model in that sense too, and I always felt like for years, am I doing a good enough job? Would Tony have done it this way? One of the things we started doing after a while was going around the table at each meeting and have everyone introduce themselves and talk about anything that might have happened in the past month. Did you sell anything new? Did you get anything published? Did you get a great rejection letter? And I always knew that Tony would have something to say because Tony was fearless in putting stuff out there all the time. He said, I always want to make sure I've got like 3 to 5 things out there for consideration each month. When it comes back, I send something else back out again. It was almost intimidating because he was just a force. And yet at the same time, it was inspirational too, because you knew he was just putting it out there, and the rejections were going to come back. Sometimes they'd be good rejections, sometimes they'd be just a form letter. But it set the tone for everybody else. And it was just great to have him as a presence in the room. And people here have talked about how much he offered advice, how much of his critiques. I think the thing that always struck me was that he always gave more than he got, it seemed, because he was just always giving something. And if it wasn't a critique, it was, some inspirational quote, to remind you that, yeah, it's not going to get done if you don't sit down in the chair and write it. It's just, you can't just find the time, wait for the inspiration. You've got to sit down in the chair and make it happen. And I was stunned to hear that he wouldn't be with us. It's unimaginable to me to think that presence, that voice, that gift that he brought to everything he did is not there in the same way now. I mean, I think he'll always be with us, but that presence was not something you could miss.
I have a little story. It's not much because I didn't, my biggest regret is that I didn't get to know him better, because I always wanted to do that. But I remember when I first saw him at the first meeting that I'd gone to, he was a presence, and I was a little intimidated. I was a little afraid of him because he was so self-assured, and he was, you just knew. I mean, he had a presence. He had an energy that you could feel. He couldn't sneak into a room for sure. But I remember it was the third noir at the bar that we had, and I sat at the table with all the people. I was there by myself, and I was sitting next to him, and he didn't say anything he didn't say overtly anything, but what he talked about, he helped relax me so I wasn't afraid. And afterwards, I realized he knew I was afraid. So he did that to distract me and calm me down and make me feel more confident. But he never said that, never pointed out that was the thing. But I knew that's what he did. And, and he talked about different things. And that's when I thought, I really would like to know this man better. But I never did. And it's one of those things I regret. But he was so gentle about it. He was so, and I guess that goes with being a comedian, that he knew timing. He knew timing. He knew how to read people. He knew exactly what to say and do to help in any way. He really was a gift. He really was a gift. That's all.
I'll say, like Sarah, when I walked into the mainline writers group, not knowing anybody, I think Gary welcomed me, and then Tony was just such a big presence there, and I immediately felt at home. Like I was like, oh, I'm coming back, and because I think when it's like in high school, if you get invited to sit at the cool kids table and like Tony being nice to you, you felt like, oh, I'm in. This, you were in with the cool kids, because Tony was just so welcoming, and I think he took it. It wasn't his responsibility, but I think he took it like a responsibility to make sure that everyone was at their best, and he was so, like everyone said, just so generous. And I've been using the word gentleman just so much since I heard the news, and I'm telling everybody, I'm like, oh, my friend, he's such a gentleman. He was and always wanted to sit next to him at dinner, because the conversation was always fascinating. And I learned about the Radium Girls from him, and the Sandhogs, and just like anything you were talking about, Tony would be like, and did you know? And you're like, what? Some people are like that, and you go, oh God. Tony, you were like, yeah, tell me more. And he would tell it in such a way, that it was just a joy. And you felt, he had a great gift for making people feel special, and I think that was just a measure of the man. So I have a few things that he wrote for me at I have a website for writers, and he wrote a few things for me and a few things for a friend of mine, one of which is his guide to giving a public reading. So I'm going to put that link in the chat because it's up there. the tips that he would read out to us are in this article as well. So I just wanted to share that. And just, Terry, you said that, you know, he might not have seemed like a family man, but the way he talked about, you know, your mother and your father, and just his, you know, his innate, his goodness, it just, you know, it was clear he was a family man. So thank you for sharing him with us.
Yeah. And about you, Terry, as well. He spoke about you to me as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Julie and Ella and Jeanette, everybody who said anything tonight. It's just so incredibly touching, so beautiful. And he did have a gentle way about him for being such a big guy.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he was gentle with, he loved children and he loved you all, and yeah. But I'm sure we'll miss him, and I wish I had brilliant words like he had right now to alleviate some of this sorrow. I'm sorry.
Terry, I've got a question, two little factoids about Tony. I don't know. He told me once that he went the entire Appalachian Trail by himself.
No, he didn't.
He didn't do that?
Okay.
And he also said that he was in the Coast Guard Academy when he was a young man.
Yes, he was in the Merchant Marines Academy.
The Merchant Marines, I'm sorry, yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So he never hiked the Appalachian Trail?
Yes, he hiked part of it. He did.
Okay.
The whole thing. That's funny. But he was out camping overnight one night. And I'm going to tell a story which he probably wouldn't have told you, but he was he's out there and he's doing his thing, and a thunderstorm comes and the lightning, so he gets in his little pop-up tent or whatever he had, and he wakes up and he's covered with slugs. Yeah, he didn't go to higher ground. Okay. So,
it didn't work into a story someplace.
Yeah.
Yeah. He left that part out. Okay.
okay, I don't blame him, but so yeah, he kind of, I guess he was out on the trail 3 or 4 days by then. He kind of did a sideline out to a road and caught a bus and went to friends in Vermont or something. Yeah. I think the slugs turned him off.
That was a turning point, yeah.
I like hotels. Hotels are nice.
That'd keep me from finishing the trail. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Harry,
Merchant Marines was actually a thing, and the story there was, he was a writer. Even then, oh my gosh, he was so fit. You couldn't have believed how he was so slender then, because of course, it's Merchant Marines Academy. Had to go through all this to get in. And he couldn't hit that deadline for this major paper at the instant that it was due. But he turned in a paper, and I can't remember what it was about. It was something really very profound. And the professor was sorry that he said, this is actually the best paper I've ever received here, but I can't accept it. I have to flunk you.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
He was a little bit late. I don't remember if it was 30 minutes or a day or whatever, but that was so upsetting to him that it colored the rest of the process, and he did come home. Yeah. Yeah.
Was the Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm a retired Coast Guard, so I wish I had asked him about that, or knew about that. That would have been interesting conversation with him.
Yeah, I bet, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you enjoyed it. Yes, you were in it.
Yeah, I was in it for 22 years, and there were, I mean, it was some of the best and some of the worst times of my life. So, but I will say that a lot of people say, oh, you know, they were, you know, sort of intimidated by your brother. And I was intimidated as well when I first met him. And, you know, I also wish that I had got to know him a little bit better. But he was this person that I said, you know, once I got to know how he approached writing, I was like, this is the bar that I have to aspire to if I want to become a writer. Because he was like, well, you know, I've got, well, I don't know what he had out. He always had like 5 stories out in 25 different publications or something like that, his process. And I was awed by that dedication. And you know, so that was my bar. It was to be like him and getting those things out. And it didn't matter if it was if I felt that the story was good or was total crap. I was like, well, I have to, you know, I have to get this out, because there's something about that process that he has instilled in me that I have to live up to. And he was just such a, I don't know, an open and giving person. You could ask him anything you wanted to ask him, and he, you know, he would reply and he would give you the straight up answer, which is rare these days, right? So, and the other thing I took away from him as my gospel was how to read aloud. I had never read aloud until I got to the Mainline Writers Group, and when he was giving, you know, critique on that, and then he came up with those reading rules and everything else that he gave to me as advice, I use that today. I'll use that tomorrow. I'll use that until, you know, until I leave this earth, because those things, there's helped me so much in learning how to read my own story. And it was a process, and I don't think I would have been good at it if it was not for Tony.
Okay.
I do remember meeting Tony. My experience with Tony was limited to coffee houses. And I think there was one time at some event somewhere that we bumped into each other as well. But I remember, and the word gracious keeps coming to my mind when it comes to Tony, because I remember thinking when I first met him, I thought to myself, okay, this is simply the most gracious man I think I've ever met. I mean, he was just, and it was effortless. And I think that's the thing that's so fascinating about him, is that all the wonderful things that people say about him, the fact that he was a presence in the room, the fact that he always had something to say, the fact that he was so smart, all these wonderful things about him. And yet it was effortless, completely gracious, and without any kind of not awareness. He's very self-aware, but there's nothing about it that was anything other than just natural and easy. And I remember, you know, when I'd be running, there'd be times when I'd be running the coffee house when he showed up in King of Prussia, not King of Prussia, in Willow Grove. And it was always nice to have him in the room, because of course, having a resource like Tony in a room when you have 40, 50 people in the room to sort of chime in and talk about different things is such a gift. And I think that's kind of the thing that always strikes me. He was always a gift. He was always wonderful to have there. It was always great to see him. And I'm very sad to know that we'll not see him again, and we'll miss him, and I'll miss him. But certainly the most gracious, lovely man I think I've ever met, among the most gracious, lovely men I've ever met.
Does anyone else have anything a story you want to convey, or?
Well, I would jump in.
Okay, jump in.
Okay, I didn't get to spend that much time with him, but he edited one of my books, and he was really wonderful. Apparently, I have some issues with quotation marks and their placement, and he was very kind and didn't beat me over the head with it, but kept it, when enforcing it. And he gave me a lot of good tips for sort of rearranging the content to make it stronger. And he had this odd thing that he and I got involved with. I'm a Texan. He asked me if I'd ever seen an ice chest. When we're talking about the old-fashioned ice chest where you put ice in the bottom of the thing, and I had actually seen an ice chest in use, but not in Texas, in South Dakota. And every time I saw him, every once in a while, he'd say, "Have you found an ice?" And no, I said, "No, I haven't found an ice chest." It was an odd thing, but we connected so quickly. I never went through the scare thing with him, although I noticed that when we were all good at the beginning of meetings, we would all say, what you're doing, and have you had rejections or this or that. And we'd all talk in a quiet tone, and then Tony would come in, "Oh yeah," and I can't remember the phrase, but it was always something about bow down. It was his book that had sold so well. And I still can't remember the phrase, the title of the book, but he was always volumes. He was like a broadcaster. The thing that struck me the most about him, however, was that for me, he seemed like a brother. We just immediately connected. It was very quiet. He wouldn't come to meetings on occasion, and I would miss him. And then he'd walk in a room and you'd say hello, and didn't have to say any more than that. We were on the same planet. So I really, really took it hard when I heard about him. And I'm really glad we're doing this tonight.
Martha, thank you so much for that, because I think he told me about you. He told me that he knew somebody with the ice chest, and that, he loved history, and he wrote for the Chester County Historical Society. He used to do he was a guide for people on Chester County Day, and he wore the big top hat like Abraham Lincoln had, and a big cloak, and he did all these, accents again, and he took people all over, and he just loved. There's an ice museum in Westchester, and he loved old historical venues and data and antiques, and so I now know who you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
One thing that keeps coming to my mind is he knew so much about history, but also his love of language. Sometimes he would say to me, that word was not in use at that time. It would be archaic to include it. I mean, and he loved words and he loved language, and he'd be, very direct in his critique, but always supportive and encouraging. And the other thing I've been thinking of tonight, as I think of all the stories we'll never get to hear from him, is I think of his world building, of the series of interconnected stories that took place in the New York City sewers that would go back to the Radium Girls and, time travel through the sewers. He had such a wonderful imagination in how he would tie these all together. And I'll miss him greatly.
Does anyone else have anything that you want to share?
I will just say that I reached out to a number of writers whose paths I know have crossed with Tony's over the years. Keith is here with us tonight. Greg is here. Mary was here. I reached out to Jonathan Mayberry. I reached out to a whole bunch of people, and everybody was shocked. And I think the thing that struck me was everyone wrote back, what a lovely man he was. And that was just the initial response. And I think that kind of sums it up. He was just a lovely man. And that's a very high compliment that you don't often hear.
I don't think that I have anything new to say. I just wanted to say how sorry I am to Terry and your father, and of course how much he will be missed. And I remember when I first met him, he was intimidating. He was just so such a presence, and he knew so much. But as through the years, when I got to talk with him, and he would critique my work or readings, and every time he would sit beside me, he was so gentle and so kind. And I remember I wanted to say something to him. I wanted to make sure I thanked him for that. And I never did it when we were in person. And I remember thinking every meeting, if he's there, I want to make sure I tell him. And 2 months ago, at one of our meetings, Zoom meetings, he was there. And I got up the courage to say, Tony, I want to tell you, you've been so kind to me, and I want to thank you for what you did. And I'm so glad I said that, because that was the last meeting that he was in, that I was in. So I just wanted to let you know, Terry, I know all these eloquent tributes, but he was just a very kind man, and he will be well remembered.
I don't have much to add. It's been really wonderful to hear everybody's sentiments. I'll just say one more thing, which is what I think he would want. Write, all of us, write, and send it out.
Yes. Yes.
When it comes back,
Well
send
done.
it out again. Yeah.
Yes. Well done.
Yeah. Tony made rejection fashionable.
Maybe in critique, you read about a certain gentleman sitting at the bar with a powerful voice and a commanding presence. Well, maybe somebody will recognize him in your story.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
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 You would make a great character, that is for sure.
That's for sure.
No place more fitting for him to show up. Yeah.
That's right. Yes.
Can I just say thank you all so much, and if you ever want to keep in touch, please feel free. I'm Terry McCarthy at Get Customs and getcustoms.com, and my family just thanks you so much, and we love you all, and we loved him, and he's watching. He's getting a kick out of it.
He's watching. Oh yeah. Yeah. And sincere condolences, Terry, to your entire family.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a great guy.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the final lesson out of all this is that, people don't always recognize what their own legacy is.
Mm.
And so I hope that each of you realizes that Tony was an amazing guy, right? But you're all amazing people, and you're all touching people every day in this way. You're touching someone else. And I hope that you realize that in times when things are not going well, or you're not achieving what you think you want to achieve, and that you realize that you're affecting other people that way as well, and that you're able to take that and remember that. Because I don't know what Tony would have thought his legacy was, right? We didn't get to ask him that. And he's probably way too modest to tell us what it was or even realize how much it was. So I hope each of you takes that away from this as well, is that your legacy is the people you touch and what you do for them.
Gary, from Tony, That was really well done, but you need to practice a little bit more so you don't get emotional.
Oh, like I haven't heard that from him before. I know that's coming from him. I've heard from that before.
Perfect. Oh, perfect. Yeah.
Here's to Tony.
That's good.
Yeah. Thank you for organizing it, Gary. That's wonderful.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks very much.
Well done,
Thank
sir.
Thank you,
Thank
Gary,
you.
very much.
For all of you.
Thank you, Gary. Here's
Here's
the family. Here's to Tony.
Here's to Tony.
Yeah, here's to Tony.
God bless you.
God bless him.
Here's to Tony.
Thank you.
I hope to see you all on happier occasions.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye,
Gary.
and bye,
Thanks,
Terry.
Terry. Terry, if there's anything any of us can do, just reach out. We'll be happy to help.
Absolutely.
Bless you.
Bye, Terry.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
all.
Love you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Nice. Bye.
Good night.
I turn this off.
It's very difficult to figure out how to turn